Hello everybody, welcome to our chapter 1.3 from Forum to Boardroom, Themes and Characters. So, what is our agenda for today? Let's begin as usual with our welcome meditation. Just a couple of minutes to ground ourselves, relax. Sometimes we are coming from traffic, from jobs, from meetings. The idea is to be grounded and connect with the spirit of the great Roman declamators in order for them to enlighten us and to have a great session. So, what is our welcome meditation? Voices in the Marble. A welcome meditation on themes and characters in Roman declamation. Number 1, let's find our stillness. Sitting upright, both feet on the floor, resting our hands lightly on your knees. Close your eyes for a bit or soften your gaze. Be comfortable behind your eyes. Inhale slowly, filling the chest. Exhale through the mouth. Letting the shoulders release. Repeat 2 more measured breaths. Now the room is growing quiet, like a basilica before the magistrate arrives. Okay, let's spend there a little bit. Say hello to your fellow students. Enter the ancient hall. Imagine some white columns rising around you. Torches flicker. The murmur of the spectators fades until only your heartbeat echoes. You stand in the center of a vast forum of the mind, a place where every story waits to be spoken by the Roman declamation style. Let's summon the archetypes or characters. One by one, feel each figure step into the light. The tyrant king, the crowned yet restless, clutching power like a shield. A faithful daughter, torn between duty and danger. A disinherited son, in exile, trembling hand. A heroic soldier, armor dented, eyes haunted by honor and loss. A stern father, voice cracked by worry and pride. A wounded slave, knowing a truth others fear to hear. Pause with each presence of these characters. Sense the weight of ambition, fear, love, betrayal, courage. Let their emotions drift across your awareness like distant trumpet calls. Focus on a particular character that you are more drawn to. Let's spend a moment there. Okay, choose your companion. Allow one character to draw closer to you. Perhaps the soldier's steady gaze, perhaps the daughter's silent resolve. Whichever voice steers you, invite it to stand at your side. Breathe in its strength, breathe out its burden. Ask yourselves inwardly, what lesson do you carry for me today in this Roman declamation context? Let's align with this theme. As you hold the figure near, feel the theme that defines the story. Betrayal, honor, moral courage, family conflict. Settle upon your shoulders like a cloak. Let it remind you that every declamation is a mirror for living choices, not a relic for dusty shelves. So it's time to get into the reflection, the pause, intention, and the action. Let's whisper to ourselves, may I speak for those who cannot, may I question power with courage, may I balance justice with mercy. Sense the form brightening, your breath calm and ready, in the here and the now. Now, let's return with purpose. Take a deep breath. Draw the stillness into your chest. Exhale gently. Let's open our eyes. The classroom returns, yet the characters remain within reach. You are no longer alone at the podium. Generations of stories stand beside you, waiting to lend their voices to yours. Welcome to the Art of Roman Declamation, our lesson 1.3, Themes and Characters. Your seat is a rostrum, your words the bridge between ancient themes and present truths. Welcome. So welcome. Let's begin with themes and characters. The subject matter of Roman declamation. What is the subject matter of a Roman declamation? This question has no obvious easy answer, given the vast spectrum of situations, figures, and plots we find in the almost 300 themes that have come down to us. And yet behind this variety, it is still possible to identify certain recurring themes. We may call them hyperthemes or umbrella themes, under which we can subsume a considerable portion of the available material. If theoretically any conflict could become the theme of a controversy, in the actual practice of the rhetorical schools, some areas appear to have been greatly privileged. In the first place, scholars have long recognized an outsized presence in the controversies of conflicts. Pertaining to the sphere of the family, a conspicuous number of themes, for example, depict frictions between fathers and sons, hostile or conversely incestuous relations between stepmothers and stepsons, even fatal encounters between brothers or husbands and wives. Jean Thomas, a great French scholar of Roman culture, whose research represents some of the first systematic studies of the subject, counts in total 161 declamations involving family conflict out of the nuclear family. Declamations abound in contrast and disputes between its inhabitants. The restricted environment of kinship constitutes a focal point of this widespread conflict. As to the reasons for the situation, these have been identified as a desire to privilege situations that correspond to the real lives of the young apprentices, allow them to verbalize frustrations and anxieties and retaliations, and thus to experience a kind of escape valve for tensions inherent in a very structure of the Roman family. To examine the material systematically would require a whole chapter rather than just this content. We will limit ourselves, then, to rapidly review what tends to tear apart the declamatory family, as it has been called by Elaine Bantam, and the frictions that most often emerge within it. Within declamation, as generally within all Roman culture, the prototypical family conflict and focal point of all fault lines that develop in familial relations is that between fathers and sons. There have been those who have understood declamation as just one long reflection on notions of authority and paternity. Conflict between fathers and sons normally emerges in the context of abdicatio, or disinheritance, or disownment, which permitted a father to expel a child from the home on the basis of any infraction against him. Shortly, we will have to clarify this quite vague expression. Such situations are so frequent in the school themes that many examples are ready at hand, as we can see already from the controversies of Seneca's first book that we spoke on chapter 1. A father with 3 sons kills 2 of them in a fit of madness. Then, when healed by the 3rd son, the father disinherits him, because when he recuperates, he recognizes his actions and realizes that the surviving son wants to take advantage of being his father's only remaining inheritor. A poor father disinherits his son when he marries the daughter of the father's wealthy enemy. In declamation, rich and poor are almost always in conflict, despite the fact that the girl's dowry has helped ransom the father from pirates. A father and a son both fight heroically, and when the law compels them fight in a duel for the title of most valorous. The father then asks the son to give him the prize voluntarily, but the son refuses and is disinherited. Under the same law, a rich man prohibits his son, Abir Fortis, to fight in a duel against another hero, who has previously killed 2 of the rich man's sons. And when the son refuses, he is disinherited by the father. And the list could easily go on and on with this theme. Even from this brief survey of examples, disinheritance normally sanctions a son's behavior when it does not conform to a father's wishes. Not coincidentally, one formulation of the declamatory law relating to abdicatio, not usually even mentioned in this theme, but simply assumed to be a familiar to students, mentions the right to disinherit a son, minus dicu audientem, who does not obey. In effect, the consistent claim of fathers in the world of school declamation is to be obeyed under any circumstance, regardless of the content of their commands, to the point that rhetoricians recommend dealing with the son's defense by preliminary addressing the general question whether a son is obliged to do whatever his father orders him to do. Fathers see themselves as possessors of absolute power, sort of tyrants, above any law, and countenancing no autonomous action in all by children. Let's see this excerpt. I, your father, have given you an order. This title is greater than any law. We throw down tribunes, we beat up candidates. To us has the right over life and death been given. In this perspective, the figure of the father, as normally represented in the school themes, appears to coincide with the cliché of the severe father, who claims all the privileges that are recognized for him by custom and by law, and who takes advantage of this without concession or mediation. For a son to offer any resistance, including in cases where their private lives are involved, as in the many controversies where a father wishes to annul a son's marriage, with some more economically promising match in mind. Is an act of intolerable insubordination. In actual fact, severity and harshness are not the only characteristics attributed to the father figure in school rhetoric. Declamation features several fathers who are indulgent of their sons, or who show solidarity with their sons' aspirations. However, these are definitely a minority of cases, and are often aimed at revealing other conflicts, such as between brothers. In this area, the influence of the traditional models appears very strong, and indeed overwhelming. This is not a place to rehash the decades-long debate about the exact nature of abdicatio, its analogies with the corresponding procedure of apokerixis mentioned by Greek rhetoricians, and its relationship with the powers traditionally recognized for the paterfamilias, or with principles attested in Roman law. In respect, Quintilian's assertion that declamatory disinheritance has no exact parallel in the real world, except very approximately, in some cases argued before the Centrum Viral Tribunal, is in my view definitive. Approximately because in Roman society disinheritance was stipulated through the will of a deceased person, and thus could lead to accusations that the will was inofficiosus, whereas abdicatio takes place inter vivos. In the juris terminology, and its immediate effect seems to be not to exclude a son from inheritance, so much as to estrange him from the domestic context and to disconnect him from the family. Thus, it seems more promising to attempt to understand what it means for declamation that disinheritance is so pervasive theme. Recent studies have seen in abdicatio an attenuated form of the Roman father's power over life and death, a sort of jus vitae necessic in miniature, which inflicts on the son a kind of civil death, but one that does not reach the level of an actual threat to his existence, or the formalization of a customary right recognized for the paterfamilias, and occasionally evidence in the sources, namely of rejecting a child who has behaved incorrectly in the political sphere or in the family context. Here I would like to suggest a further and different perspective from which to examine the question. In the case mentioned earlier, and in many others, the son is disinherited not for behavior that violates any law. In declamation, abdicatio is never represented as a family-level duplicate of some law that the city has inflicted or could inflict publicly upon a child. The distinction between the two levels is clarified by the declaimer Porcius Latro, the most authoritative figure among those cited in Seneca's The Elder collection, in response to the question whether it is legitimate to repudiate the son for actions he has taken legally. If a son has done something illegal, let the law mete out punishment. If he has done something legal but importunate, let his father do so. Disinheritance does not relate to the commission of a crime, but to the shrinking of responsibilities. It is hard to imagine a more Roman distinction than this, as it invokes the complex, multi-layered concept of officium. Repudiation of a child does not pretend to be a substitute for civil law, nor does it represent itself as a private familial version of the law. Instead, the two interventions exist on different planes. Designed by Latro through the opposition between licet and oportet, and between celus and officium, the two pairings of terms are in fact closely related, as suggested by the definition of oportet, that internal to Roman culture itself, comes from Cicero's Orator, a text chronologically very close to Latro. In Cicero's oportere is described as a perfect completion of officium, which is equal for all in all circumstances. In contradiction to the sere, which indicates a congruity between the individual and his or her behaviors, and thus varies from person to person. With oportet, from Cicero, then Latro refers to what the son is called open to do qua son. In this particular abstract, the role he plays within the family, regardless of the particular case envisioned in the theme of the controversy. At stake is what anthropologists call attitudinal relations, behaviors that are culturally expected by one member of the group, in this case, the nuclear family, towards the other members of the same group. As for officium, this is a term that escapes easy definition. The English word duty renders one of its many senses, but more precisely, officium signifies full conformity with one's role, and in particular, one's social role and obligations an individual is expected to fulfill by virtue of the relationships that binds him to other members of the family and society. In other words, a son officium consists with expression of pietas, another exquisitely Roman concept. Please be sure to take notes of these concepts so you can integrate them to your writings and declamations, with which it is often associated and of which it represents the behavioral manifestation. We cannot ignore another implication of what Latro has said. Obeying the law is not sufficient for a son. This does not exhaust the totality of officium expected of him. In fact, there exist certain legally permissible behaviors that, nevertheless, are deemed unacceptable on the level of interpersonal relationships, at least by the demanding fathers of Latin declamations, which were very demanding. In this sense, a father in Pseudo Quintilian was not wrong to consider the very name of father to be omni lege maius, and the dozens of controversies on the subject of abdicatio can be read as a continuous reflection on the forms, limits, and substance of that adaptation to the role, to which terms such as oportet and officium make reference, as we have recalled. They relentlessly discuss the duties of a child, negotiating the boundaries of autonomy and independence, and questioning a category that is constitutively open, like that of opportunity. At the same time, the father's power, far from given, becomes a problem, a claim that must be justified time and again before the virtual tribunal, to which the parties present their respective cases that you will be presenting. There are certainly cases in declamation where a repudiated son accepts unquestioningly whatever punitive measures have been leveled against him. The verb used in this case is usually facere, as in the theme of Seneca. But usually the abducatus challenges the father's decision and takes him to court, submitting this decision to the consideration of a third impartial party. This solution is highly productive insofar as it offers a pretext for examining the conflict between father and son from every possible angle. Ritualized largely in the form of litigation in a court, the father-son conflict, in some cases, reaches a level of hostility that even risk their lives. In school themes, the father right over life and death is often evoked, but normally remains in the background, and is substituted by the more anodyne and contractual abdicatio. However, there are many themes in which a father does not actually demand the death of a child, or at any rate would like to reach that point. Put yourself in the time and space of these Roman declamations, in which anything can happen, such as extreme violence, parricide between the father and the son. By the same token, there are many themes in which the son is accused of attempted patricide, as we were saying, such as an accusation can lead to a court trial on the basis of actio parricidi, but also to a domestic trial that sometimes ends with a death sentence, as in Seneca the Elder's Controversia 7.1 says. An obsession with patricide, as we were saying, dominates the Roman cultural imagination. It's like a constant fear that goes with the fathers. So, and it's not surprise that the rhetorical schools incorporate this theme as well. As you can see, there are some themes that we start to extract from the cultural thoughts, feelings, ideas, relationships from this period from Rome. Declamations on the subject express the fear that the conflict between fathers and sons may reach such a point of hostility, as we were saying, that it will overwhelm all institutional forms of conflict resolution envisioned in the city of the sophists, plunging the family into primordial, hopeless chaos. So when you start redacting your speeches, your declamations, start feeling these ideas like the constant fear of parricide, the killing of a son, etc. These conflicts between fathers and sons do not, however, exhaust the range of controversies that feature members of the nuclear family as protagonists, even if they are the predominant form. Mention must also be made of those other members of the family who appear in the controversies, beginning with the figure of the mother. In declamation, the mother is not normally a source of tension, except when she represents the second pole in the negotiation between opposing loyalties. The first being represented by the father, or sometimes, as in the 16th Major of Pseudo-Quintilian, by a deserving friend. This is the case of Seneca's Controversia 1.4, in which a son must choose whether to kill his mother. As you can see, now we are entering into, we have reviewed patricide, now the killing of a mother who has been caught in the act of adultery according to his father's demands, or instead, hear her pleas of piety and spare her. Or again, the Seneca in Controversia 7.4, where ransoming the father captured by pirates is weighted against assisting the mother, who has become blind from grief at his absence. In general, relationships with the mother are characterized by solidarity and affection. in line with ways in which the relationship is figured in Roman culture in the Republican period, the cultural memory of this period, very different from the rigidly formal relationship that characterizes interactions with the father. If, in this last respect, controversies about suspicion of patricide appear to be the extreme manifestation of a relationship that is nevertheless marked by an endemic conflict. In the case of the strongly affectionate relationship with the mother, its extreme version is represented by the suspicion of incest. A new theme has been opened here. So we have reviewed patricide, the killing of the mother, now incest, that unacceptable manifestation of an excess of proximity that may even justify the killing of the son. So when you start writing your Roman declamations, get loose of the constraints of today's world. Let's put ourselves on the feet of the father, the mother, the son, the patricide, the killing of the mother, the incest, as happened in the last two mayores of Pseudo-Quintilian. Brothers too often appear in declamation in affectionate relationships, joining in opposition to the father, or who can have controverted ideas, the two brothers from the father. In many controversies, for example, the conflict arises when the son has to choose whether to help his brother or his father. The twin minores 287 and 375 are of this type and portray a beer fortis. The beer fortis. Keep that in mind. Having who has acted heroically in war and who thus has the right to choose any price, having to decide whether to save his brother, guilty of desertion and awaiting the death penalty, or his father, accused of treason, choosing to save his brother and thus only being able to assist his father at trial. This man is then disinherited after his father is judged innocent. They are exemplary because they demonstrate how the father-son relationship creates tensions with the son, other possible loyalties within the family. Here, disinheritance works to sanction not so much the son's refusal to ask for his father's pardon, as his choice to privilege a horizontal sibling relationship between equals while spurning the fundamental bond that is represented by the father-son relationship. Start making analogies, a relationship between the father and the son, like the relationship between the tyrant and the people that he is governing, who needs to be killed, the son, which are the people, or the tyrant. What would be part of the brother, the mother, the patricide, the killing of the mother or the son, or incest? Start developing that sort of ideas. There are some situations, judges, that take on a different appearance when compared to others. The death of a brother is terrible in itself, but when compared to the risk of my own death, even this eventually becomes acceptable. So, direct conflict between brothers is relatively rare in the school themes, but it exists, and conflict between sisters is practically absent. But you could put that themes in your declamations, the relationship between brothers, the relationship between sisters, and the mother, the father, killing of a son, killing of a daughter, the incest, etc. In the few examples that do exist, this conflict features what I have called elsewhere a short circuit of sharing, almost mirror images of one another, joined from infancy by a common history, and bound by a relation of strong reciprocal solidarity. In affection, brothers clash in declamation, either when they aspire to a good that by nature cannot be shared, for example, the fiancé or the wife of the other brother, as in Minores 286 and 291, or vice versa, when they wish to enjoy the inheritance exclusively, when this should instead be shared. Continuing our analysis of the family in declamation, a few words are sufficient for the figure of the stepmother, another new character. Probably the most stylized character in the universe of our Sophistopolis. Remember, place yourself in the Sophistopolis. You're the father, the tyrant, the son, the brother, the sister, the mother, the stepmother. Who would be your characters? The tyrant, the government. Stepmother figures almost invariably as the enemy of children, of the husband's first marriage, often for murky reasons related to inheritance. Recent studies also underscore the character of the virago, which is the woman capable of an almost manly audacity, who is willing to commit any crime. So we have the vir fortis, for example, the heroic son, the heroic father, the stepmother, now the virago, which is sort of tyrant, the woman capable of almost manly audacity, who is willing to commit anything to have her means. In some cases, the stepmother and stepson are instead suspected of having a relationship that Roman culture considers incestuous, even in the absence of blood relation between the partners. Whether overly hostile towards Vivini or bound to them by relations of excessive closeness, the nobreka is thus always positioned between cultural norms. In the few cases where we find good stepmothers, as in Minor 327, this reconfiguration can be explained by declamation tendency to play with its own stereotypes or to introduce seemingly impossible themes. As you can see, you can be the most flexible and open of your themes, which requires students to display great creativity, as I was saying, and talent in defending a figure. So, picture yourself as an attorney, defending figure of the mother, the stepmother, the sister, the father, the tyrant. That appears almost automatically condemned by virtue of its role. You want to be the vir fortis? Do you want to be the virago? Start taking notes on this type of characters. The literalness of depictions of stepmothers is indisputable. However, even if depictions of stepmothers accurately capture some pathology of the Roman familia, for the ease of divorce, very high infant mortality, and frequency of second marriages would have made the relationship with a stepmother a common experience for a significant number of adolescents. We must explore not only the historical plausibility of a figure of the declamatory universe in our Sophistopolis, but also its functionality, that is, the role it plays in the narrative syntax of that universe that you will be creating, and the way in which it contributes to its functioning. Whereas the father figure appears to lend itself to a twin representations of the severe, cruel father, like a tyrant, and of the indulgent father, and there are cases in which this figure shifts from one to another. You can start being The indulgent then become cruel. The figure of the mother represents very little variation, closely tied as it to be the cliché of closeness and solidarity with the request of her children. The noverka therefore occupies the gap in this system, construed in declamation as a sort of anti-mother, a mirror image of the maternal figure capable of taking on those traits of distance, aversion, or even open hostility like the virago. Not by chance in those rare cases where a mother is defined as crudelis, the declaimer hastens to observe that her behavior would be more appreciated to an noverka. If the noverka is almost always an anti-mother, she often also assumes the traits of an anti-wife, bound to the husband by murky hereditary aspirations rather than by attachment and dedication. Normally, the matrimonial bond appears in the declamation to trump other and potentially coexisting family loyalties. Thus, in Seneca, Controversia 2.2, the wife does not want to break off her marriage, despite her father's command, and in the presence of her husband, very questionable behavior. In Controversia 2.5, the wife resists to torture inflicted on her by the tyrant, without betraying her husband. Also, the aspect of torture to the mother, to the virago, to the stepmother, to the father, to the son is very common in declamations. So start imagining those concepts. Who is involved in a plot to overthrow the despot or the tyrant? In 6.4, the wife wishes to commit suicide, so to not outlive her husband, who has been proscribed. In 10.3, during the trauma of the civil war, the wife chooses to follow her spouse instead of her father, who is on the opposite side. In Pseudo-Quintilian's Minor 357, the wife refuses to abandon her husband, despite his condemnation to blindness for adultery and her repudiation by her father, and so on. If there is anything that can break this exceedingly strong bond, it is a husband who in some way compromises the safety of his children, whose side a mother takes without hesitation, as we will see later. So, start becoming used to these dramas, to these themes in Roman declamation. But the mother who is loyal to the point of self-sacrifice is not the only possible manifestation of the conjugal relationship found in the Roman declamation. In this culture marked by fear of female adultery and by the possible contamination of the bloodline, school rhetoric frequently confronts this theme and indeed develops it in many forms. As you can see, in this Sophistopolis world, we have a lot of stretches of the most horrible crimes, things, and that you can imagine. The controversies on this topic, in total about 30 cases of the almost 300 surviving themes, can also involve conflicts between father and sons, as in Seneca 1.4, where the son is disinherited for not having executed the two lovers in spite of his father's orders. But mostly this turn on questions on the just exercise of the betrayal husband's right to kill, which is given to him by scholastic laws, just as the controversies on abdicatio relate to limitations on the paternal prerogative. The rhetoricians use all their creativity to invent situations that put the jus occidendi in conflict with the different specific cases in which is applied. The husband who has killed the two lovers is in exile and thus deprived of civil rights. The adulterous woman is pregnant and this gives her the right to have her execution delayed until she gives birth. As you can see, more and more stretches of all sorts. A right that she betrayed husband has not respected. The wife believes rumors that her husband has died during a voyage and remarries, only to be surprised by him on his return, which is very common in Roman declamation, and killed together with her new partner. Adultery is committed with an ex-fiancé or an ex-husband from whom the woman has been forced to separate, and thus puts in question the legitimacy of the killing, because adultery may not apply, and so on. Adulterous contact and such is never problematized. In this respect, declamation does not waver in its commitment to the traditional model of the female and to its corresponding sexual ethics, not by chance. Remember, we are in Sophistopolis, we can make the stretches that we want. Adultery is one of the few crimes in Sophistopolis that do not come under the jurisdiction of the courts, unless it involves an accusation ex suspicione, as in Seneca Controversia 2.7, where there are clues but not clear evidence that a betrayal has actually been consummated, or in Minor 330, the juridical premise of Minor 300, where the adulterous woman is brought to trial first in a domestic court, and a second time in the forum. It is not clear. In a world where almost all conflicts, all stretches end up in court, the repression of female conduct remains a prerogative of her husband. As we were saying, all sorts of things that the husband, the father, can make. And if he is brought to court, it is only when there is some doubt where he has abused the prerogatives recognized for him by law. Even in this case, however, there is a distinction. The inviolability of marriage remains a non-negotiable value, as often reiterated. But students familiarize themselves with the idea that many circumstances could intervene to limit the husband's punitive powers, and even to make the woman's behavior justifiable in some way. As for just a parenthesis, we're not open to this sort of violence, but we are recalling all the stretch and the themes that can happen in Roman declamation. So you can open your mind and start redacting your speeches in that way. We open this series of examples by observing that family conflicts represent a significant portion of the themes proposed by teachers to their students in Roman declamation. But naturally, these do not exhaust the possible questions dealt with by the school themes. So what else does Roman declamation deal with? The second most frequent topic in the preserved material relates to what we could call the allocation of wealth. In some cases, the two motives are actually tightly interwoven. As for example, in the controversies that see two brothers fighting over inheritance or sons accused of attempted patricide, almost invariably, fathers who make this accusation attribute their sons' presumed homicidal intentions to uncontainable greed. Greed is a huge thing here. To the desire of getting their hands on their father's coveted wealth, the charge of being luxurious, and so of privileging hedonistic consumption over virtuous accumulation can be brought both against fathers, who then become accused of insanity by their sons, as in the theme of Seneca 2.6, and against sons, who then run the risk of being disinherited, the greed of wealth. In each case, the behavior is strongly censored, especially if enacted by someone who should act as a guarantor of culturally accepted models for the use of goods. In Saulus' time, and before that, in the period of our famous Cato the Elder, Luxuria was a sign of a perverted relationship with wealth, exemplary biographical trajectory. This could happen a lot with tyrants who are just very fixed with luxuria, or with fathers, which a father could claim with the pride of one who knows he has confronted fully with traditional models. It is depicted in Minor Creek 16. From young adulthood, I led a frugal life. I increased my patrimony. I married. I raised a son. This can be compared with Terence's portrait of the Pater Severus the Tyrant, the mere co-protagonist of the Adelpho. He lived always saving and working, took a wife and brought two sons into the world, limiting self-indulgent consumption, conserving and increasing the inherited patrimony, fulfilling of the civic obligation of marriage, and producing children, continuing to be the cornerstones of the only ethics of wealth that Roman culture was capable of elaborating over the course of its history. The overlap between family conflicts and questions relating to the distribution of wealth would be much greater if those who believe abdicatio entailed disinheritance, along with disownment a right. This is certainly true in the case of Greek apocalypsis, for the word of Latin declamation. The question is controversial, not least because it is a question that did not particularly energize the rhetoricians, except in the cases where the theme involved the death of the father, and so required clarification of the hereditary position of that abdicatus. But conflicts relating to assess or access the wealth are also placed outside the family. To this category or theme belong the numerous controversies centering on enmity between a rich man and a poor man. This theme was so common that in Petronius' Satyricon, when Trimalchio invites the rhetorician Agamemnon to propose a theme of declamation, he begins with the word pauper et types inimici errant, only to be immediately interrupted by the host, who in his arrogance claims not to know the meaning of pauper. In such a genre as controversia, which is based on conflict, the opposition between wealth and poverty represents a very convenient departure point, a situation in which hostility appears to be already inherent, with no need of any pretext to be translated into action. A theme that is very present in our times. However, it has been observed that this opposition is not particularly unexpected in the context of Imperial Rome. In reality, that is where social inequalities were progressively radicalized, and where they would soon be codified in the odious legal distinction between honestores and humiliores, roughly coinciding with the opposition between wealthy elites and subaltern classes. The political ideological matrix of the rich-poor opposition appears to characterize Greek declamation, especially where it probably reflects this deep mistrust of wealth lodged in the Athenian cultural imagination, which saw in the wealthy so many potential adversaries of their system, the democratic system. Thus it is in Greek declamation that the young man accused of aspiring to tyranny is qualified as rich, or instead Pseudo-Quintilian's Minor 267, which translates this theme into the Latin, speaks generically of some such man. In our Roman context, economic disparity alone appears sufficient to arouse class hatred, which all its implications for prestige and influence on the hand and lack of social capital on the other. More than once, a court seems to represent a level playing field, offering even to the weakest members of society the possibility of having their voices heard and of escaping conflict through negotiation, rejecting the logic of feuds. Besides the conventional conflict between types and power, less stereotyped themes related to the domain of wealth are found frequently, especially in the minores. For example, the inheritance of a raptor contested by his relatives and the rapta who in articulo mortis decide to marry him. Distribution of wealth is imposed by law on all citizens to avoid the emergence of tyranny, restitution of deposits, dispositions of wills in favor of friends and freed men, goods confiscated by the city whose restitution is petitioned, inheritance of a sacrilegious assassin contested between the temple and the accuser, gifts offered by patrons and refused by their clients. Keep in mind these themes so you can review it on your declamations. Cancellation of debts and their effects on a will that has two brothers as its beneficiaries. Deposition of goods undeclared to the tax authorities. The inheritance of an arch-pirate claimed by the slave girl, who a father has offered to him to marry instead of his daughter. Accusations relating to the economic exploitation of guardianship. Fights between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law, both widowed, over their dowries, charge brought by pimps who have seen their money squandered after one of their girls has taken a love potion offered by her lover. As you can see, we are beginning here with potions, pimps, lovers, etc. Among other things, it is not coincidence that the only Roman law explicitly mentioned as such in declamation has to do with questions precisely of a patrimonial nature. It is the so-called lex Boconia, actually a plebiscite passed in 169 BCE by the tribune Quintus Boconius Saxa. Controversial in principle, probably quickly avoided and eventually set aside, but which in any case limit the hereditary rights of women, apparently to avoid excessive concentrations of wealth. We do not know a parallel in Greek declamation. In any case, the presence of economic themes in this Latin school rhetoric has not been exhaustively studied, and yet it captures a profound characteristic of Roman culture and society, where legislation regarding wealth, honorable forms of acquiring it, limits on its consumption, its protection of the existing social order, and above all, on its hereditary transmission by wills, legacies, trusts, donations, adoptions, and so on. Already from the period of 12 tables had a huge role to play in legal regulation. Declamation faithfully reflects its legislative and cultural centrality. In many cases, declamation depicts situations that would actually take place in real life, and addresses these situations using models that were not dissimilar to those used in the field by jurists. From this point of view, it is relevant that the controversiae in which Romanists have tended to see analogies with the arguments of classical jurisprudence are precisely those that belong to the category we are examining. More generally, school rhetoric demonstrates that it fully understood the importance that questions and conflicts tied to the preservation and the transformation of wealth had in Roman culture, and that it gave them an appropriate amount of treatment within the training it offered to its users, who all came from an elite whose main privilege was property ownership. In the family and in the many conflicts arising her terrain, as well as in the circulation of wealth, Roman declamation identified the two great problematic nodes for constructing its stories, before closing the survey of themes and figures in the universe of school rhetoric. However, we need to mention certain other characters who had special status with declamation. It should be obvious that the universe of Sophistopolis is highly litigious. is also regulated, if nothing else, by virtue of the fact that the possibility of bringing illegal behaviors to justice was guaranteed to all its inhabitants thanks to its articulated system of laws. But beyond the walls of the tidy city of the sophists, there is also space of disorder, of danger, and of subversion of cultural rules. This is a space mostly marine, sometimes terrestrial, that in declamation is indicated normally through the adverb peregre. Those who inhabit it or come from it are often possessors of potentially disruptive otherness, which must be guarded against and with which relations of reciprocity and exchange are impossible. Therefore, as in the corpus of the stories of magic studied by Vladimir Prop in the famous Morphology of the Folk Tale, distance from home, declamation often triggers successive developments of events, either because foreign contact acts as the harbinger of injury, or because the absence of the husband presages an onset of changes that will need to be taken account of on return. This is the case for Seneca the Elder's Controversia 2.7, which we have already cited for the accusation of adultery brought by ex suspicione. A man who had a beautiful wife departed for a foreign country. A foreign merchant moved into the neighborhood. He propositioned the man's wife 3 times for adultery, promising monetary compensation. She refused. The merchant died, and in his will left the beautiful woman as inheritor of all his goods, and added a note of praise. I found a loyal woman. The woman accepted the inheritance. Her husband returns and accuses her of adultery on suspicion. Ancient culture naturally did not have to wait for declamation before elaborating negative images of merchants, whose itinerancy afforded an easy metaphor for ethical untrustworthiness, and whose persuasive and tricky speech could be deployed both to hawk wares and to entice defenseless matrons into adulterous affairs. In our case of RD, the departure of the husband towards peregre and the arrival of the presumptive seducer constitutes an inversion of internal and external, whereby the cause that pertains to the latter comes to be in the very heart of the cultural cosmos of our Sophistopolis, threatening it up close. The problematic outcome of this encounter is already inscribed in this topological inversion. The figure of the merchant appears very rarely in the extant declamations. By contrast, the figure of the pirate is a fixed inhabitant of the world external to Sophistopolis, not subject to the negotiator mobility, inheriting a characterization of pirates long established in the Greek imaginary. In Roman declamation, the figure of the pirate is marked above all by his foreignness to culture in every form, an outsider, an outlier. From his addiction to blood to his barbarism, from his systematic infringement of the law to his generalized exercise of violence. So when you set up a pirate character, put this into your mind. Even the pirate's physical appearance is portrayed as going beyond the norm in terms of color of his skin, dimensions of his body, shade of his hair, the ferocity of his gaze, and more, like a demonistic figure. To offer one example, in the depiction given by Cestius Pius, pirates are disposed to every cruelty. They make sport of legal and illegal, undertake thievery on land and on sea. They take other goods at sword point. Their outward appearance reflects the cruelty and their addiction to human blood, to violence, and they flaunt laces and chains. Moreover, they are naturally inclined to imprison any infortunate soul that happens to fall into their hands, and to threaten the honor of chaste matrons and pure virgins. These traits are inherited from an extensive literary tradition and are constantly varied by declaimers. Besides individuals episodes featuring pirates as protagonists, in the school themes the pirate represents the other par excellence, unassimilable, a source of disorder that cannot be accommodated and that resists any attempt at accumulation or regulation. The society to which the pirate belongs is the reverse of the city, and the opposite of the world in which and to which the rhetoricians trained the young aristocrats who attended their schools. When you use a pirate character, try to figure out that inversion, that otherness. Not coincidentally, pirates never appear in easy valor as a counterpart in debates imagined taking place in court. By definition, pirates cannot tolerate having their motives discussed in such an exquisitely civil context. In this sense, pirates are like another figure, systematically excluded from forensic context, namely the tyrant, a sort of internal order, a malignant presence in the otherwise healthy body of the Sophistopolis, the city. It is worthwhile touching briefly on this figure. Imagine in the world of today, pirates, the thieves who are around the roads and that are around the city, who use all sorts of violence, tricks, and harsh things to steal trucks and logistics and all sorts of merchandise. And they will do anything to not go into trial or to get in the city system of law. These declamations relating to tyrants and tyrannicides have already been discussed in the excellent and replaceable monograph of Rafaela Tobacco, published nearly 40 years ago. Tobacco had demonstrated a figure of the tyrant is very strongly stereotyped and characterized above all by simple-minded and arbitrary ferocity, morbid suspiciousness, and absence of relations with the rest of the city civic body, jealous physical and psychological closedness, solitariness in the well-protected precinct of the citadel, and so on. You know the tyrants of our today's world. Naturally, declamation did not invent these traits, but adopted and adapted them from an established tradition going back to Greek and Athenian political thought. The tyrant of school rhetoric represents, moreover, a negation of the values on which a well-regulated society is based. So now you know. He tortures free men violating a fundamental norm in declamation. The tyrant is like the pirate, but from the city. He uses proclamations ordering sons to behead their fathers, according to a theme referenced by Petronius in the opening of the Satyricon, and an exact parallel of which has been found in Greek, where he forces sons to beat their fathers, whereas the standard law of controversia says that for such behavior a son's hands should be cut off. And he authorizes slaves to kill their masters and to rape their mistresses, inverting the social order and vicariously exhibiting the predatory and voracious sexuality that is typical of the tyrant in this Greek-Roman imaginary. So when you portray the tyrant, you can have your mind loose. Last but not least, the hero of declamation is a tyrannicide, the only figure, together with the Virfortis, to whom school laws give absolute discretion in choosing a price for this meritorious act. And naturally, declamatory jurisprudence recognizes the crime of affectatio tyrannidis. an act so grave that it justifies even patricide, and it's suspicious of any behavior that smacks of tyranny, as when a man is accused of aspiring to absolute power. Simply, he was unable to gaze upon the citadel, a tyrant typical abode, metonymic of tyranny itself, without shedding a tear. Pirates do not appear in declamation as an excuse for speaking about maritime security or of conflicts between irrecognizable worlds. Similarly, tyranny is never realized in action in Sophistopolis. It is something that happens elsewhere or in the past, or is a dangerous aspiration that must be guarded against. Almost always the appearance of pirates or tyrants is simply the trigger of a conflict that belongs to the sphere of the family, because a father hesitates to ransom his son and the stepmothers intervenes, because a son has to abandon his blind mother to reach his father, because a father can only afford to ransom one of his two sons who have been captured by pirates, because a son kills his father for advocatio tyrannidis, only then to be suspected of aspiring to tyranny himself, or because after killing two tyrant sons, a father demands as his reward that his third be sent into exile, and so on. The appearance of these figures thus functions to generate tensions within the universe of the family relations, provoking conflicts of exposing the members of that universe to complex choices, even when declamation sets its eyes on the vast seas and the risk of journeys, the secrets of power, or dark aspirations for despotism. It always ends up breaking this back within the walls of the home and the boundaries of the family, as if evoking the other and elsewhere is only the obtained pretext for talking about the self. So said this, we have finished our content of themes and characters. So why themes and character matters? Why wrestle with the hard themes? Because every time you confront a brutal Roman dilemma, starving parents, tyrants, battlefields, pirates, exhaustion, love, team treason, patricide, killing of a mother, incest, rape, you stretch the borders of your own moral map. Declamation is not comfortable reading. It is weight training for judgment, when you argue whether a deserter deserves mercy or a neglectful son deserves an unmarked ditch. You practice three habits. Radical empathy, you must argue both sides with equal fire, seeing through eyes not your own. Moral engineering, you test how rules bend or break under real human pressure. Think of Roman declamation as a grand mirror of all that has happened throughout history. And fearless speech, you learn to name ugly truths without flinching, then shape them into reason. Our area is flooded with slogans and soft takes. Roman declamation hands you the harder questions and says, build a bridge across this chasm, or watch society fall in. Watch countries, families, tyrants fall in. If you can navigate these thunderous stories, you will speak in courtrooms, and communities with a clarity that silences noise and compels action. Dive in, not to admire unseen cruelty, but to forge the courage, precision, and compassion that modern leadership so desperately lacks. These umbrella themes, the family, the betrayal, the duty, the forbidden love, and the stock characters who carry them. Start using all these sorts of themes and characters into the writing of your declamations and speeches. So that's it. Let's go to activity 1.3, a mini declamation into voices. Our goal is that students you pick one recurrent umbrella theme that we have reviewed, maybe one or two stock characters: the father, the son, the pirate, the tyrant, the mother, stepmother, sister. Then build a short 90-second romance-style declamation, or more if you want, that pits those characters against each other. I've put here some themes, some typical characters pairings, which you can choose, and the seed conflict. The son leaves home, the noble plans to free and marry the captive, the senator invokes a law of treason, etc. There are several character pairings and seed conflicts that you can review, pick, as you can see, forbidden love, justice versus mercy, public honor versus private shame, pirates versus the military, the Peter Fortis versus the father, etc. Then, please draft a scenario with 8 to 10 sentences: the city, the year, the crisis, the relationship between the two characters, the inciting incidents, for example, fortune, engagement, desertion, and end with a clear question for the tribunal: guilt or innocence, mercy or punishment, permission or denial. Like the example: in Athens AD, Marcus Octavius, a decorated centurion, learns his only son Lucius abandoned the legion during a brutal winter siege, but returned with enemy plans that save the horde. Military law demands death, paternal love demands pardon. The Senate must decide execution or reward. Elaborate on that. You can see we can use the structure of the mini declamations. The conjectura, establish whether that happened, by whom, by what matter. The definition, classify the act in legal moral terms: desertion, abandonment, rescuer, tyrannicide. The qualitas, judge Jack's value, choosing one subspecies. And status rationalis, raise a procedural point if useful: translation, court, prescription, time limit, jurisdiction, competence. Some legal themes, but we can be open to several themes also. More examples on some subspecies, when to use them, quick angle, for you to grasp some ideas. Criminis, remoto criminis, absolutiva, concession, comparison, relation, letters, etc. And then, build your 200, 300 word speech with conjectura, definition, and qualitas. I will be posting example in the article at LinkedIn, and you can be free to comment. Like the status rationalis, the translation example, and the closing sententia. Law without mercy, or is wrong. Mercy without law, or is justice. So, goodbye from our fellow Cato the Elder, which we will be reviewing soon. I hope that this content of themes and character were from your interest. Thank you for hearing, listening, and develop your speeches, your declamations. Any question you can post it on the comment section. This was lecturer Marcus Ramo. Thank you. See you in the next chapter, which is very interesting about all the cultural memory of Roman declamation. Thank you and have a wonderful day, evening, or night. Goodbye.